You get dressed every single morning without thinking about it. Shirt, pants, maybe a jacket if it's cold. It's automatic. It's boring. It's the least interesting decision you make all day. Now stop for a second, because here's a question that sounds simple and isn't. Why do you do that at all? Not, why do you wear a specific outfit? Why does your species wear anything on its body in the first place? Every other primate on Earth is walking around completely naked and doing just fine. You are the one exception. The one primate that looked at its own skin and decided, no, we're covering that up. And the answer to why is not what you think. It's not really about being cold. It's not really about modesty. It's something much stranger, much older, and honestly a little bit disturbing once you follow it all the way down. Let's go. Here's the first thing that should bother you. Humans lost most of their body hair somewhere around 1 to 2 million years ago. That is an ancient event. We were naked, sweaty, hairless apes running around the African savanna long before we were anything close to modern humans. And the leading theory for why we went hairless is actually kind of brutal. We were persistent hunters. We chased prey animals for hours in the heat until they physically collapsed from the exhaustion. And to do that without overheating ourselves to death, we needed to sweat efficiently across bare skin. Fur traps heat. Bare sweaty skin releases it. So natural selection took our fur away because it was killing our hunting strategy. Fine. Naked apes running down antelope in the African heat. That tracks. But here's the part that should stop you cold. If we lost our hair 1 million plus years ago and clothing only shows up in the archaeological record much later, that means there is a gap. A genuinely enormous stretch of time where our ancestors were hairless and also not wearing anything to replace the hair. Just walking around bare-skinned in a world with no jackets, no fire on demand, no fur, for potentially hundreds of thousands of years. Nobody really talks about that gap. It's uncomfortable. It's the part of the story that gets skipped because it doesn't have a tidy answer. So, when did we actually start covering up? This is where the story gets genuinely bizarre because the smoking gun evidence doesn't come from fabric. Fabric doesn't survive. It rots, it decomposes, it's gone within decades in most environments. The evidence comes from something you would never expect in 1 million years. Lice. Yes, lice. Stay with me here, because this is one of the strangest and most elegant pieces of detective work in all of evolutionary biology. Humans host 2 separate species of lice. Head lice, which live in your hair, and body lice, which live specifically in clothing, in the seams and fibers of fabric worn against skin. Body lice cannot survive without clothing. It is not a preference. It is a biological requirement. No clothes, no body lice. They physically need fabric to live in. Now here's the move that changes everything. In 2003, researchers led by biologist Rolf Kittler used genetic analysis to figure out when body lice diverged from head lice as a separate species. Because if body lice can only exist where there's clothing, then the moment they evolved into a distinct species tells you the moment clothing became common enough, worn consistently enough for an entirely new species of parasite to evolve to exploit it. The answer that came back was approximately 170,000 years ago. Let that number sit there for a second. Not sewing needles, not fabric fragments, a parasite's own evolutionary timeline, written into its DNA, telling us almost exactly when humans started wearing clothes, regularly enough to create a permanent ecological niche for lice to move into. That is one of the most quietly brilliant pieces of scientific detective work most people have never heard of. We figured out the origin of clothing by studying what was living inside it. So why then? Why 170,000 years ago specifically? This is where climate comes back into the story, and it's not a coincidence. That period overlaps with a series of brutal glacial cycles, cooling phases that hit parts of Africa and the regions early humans were beginning to migrate through. As populations pushed toward cooler climates and unpredictable seasonal cold, hairless, sweaty-skinned humans needed something. Fast. Fur was gone. Winter wasn't. And this is the part that actually answers our original question. Clothing wasn't invented for comfort. It wasn't invented for style. It was invented because a species had evolutionarily painted itself into a corner. We removed our natural insulation for a hunting advantage 1 million years earlier. And then, when the climate turned on us, we had to engineer a replacement from scratch using nothing but dead animal skin and raw ingenuity. Clothing is, biologically speaking, a patch. A workaround, a fix for a problem our own evolution created. Now, let's talk about how they actually made it, because this is where it gets genuinely impressive. The earliest clothing almost certainly wasn't sewn. It was draped, wrapped, Pinned, a hide thrown over the shoulders and tied at the waist. Functional, but crude, and critically full of gaps. Wind gets in, rain gets in. If you've ever tried to stay warm in a blanket that keeps slipping off your shoulders, you already understand the fundamental design flaw of pre-sewn clothing. The breakthrough came with the needle. Not a metal needle, obviously. A needle carved from bone, thin, polished, with a tiny hole punched through one end for thread made from sinew or plant fiber. The oldest bone needles we found from a site called Sebudu Cave in South Africa date back roughly 60,000 years. Eyed needles, the kind with an actual threaded hole rather than just a hook, show up around 40,000 to 50,000 years ago at sites in Siberia and China. And once you have a needle, you don't just have clothing anymore. You have tailored clothing, fitted sleeves, closed seams, a garment that traps body heat instead of leaking it out through every gap in a draped hide. Here's the detail that almost nobody brings up, and it might be one of the most consequential facts in this entire story. Neanderthals lived through some of the harshest ice age winters in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. They were tough, cold adapted, and physically robust in ways modern humans are not. But the archaeological record shows very little evidence that Neanderthals used eyed needles or tailored garments. Their clothing appears to have remained largely simple: wrapped hides, capes, functional but not fitted. Homo sapiens, arriving later into those same brutal European winters, came in with sewn, layered, fitted clothing, actual insulated boots, multi-layer garments discovered through the tools and ornamentation left behind at sites across Ice Age Russia and Ukraine. Some researchers have proposed, and it's a genuinely serious hypothesis, that this difference in clothing technology may have been one of the factors that gave Homo sapiens a survival edge over Neanderthals during the coldest stretches of the last ice age. Not intelligence in some abstract sense, not superior weapons. A needle and thread, a tighter seam, a few extra degrees of retained body heat on a night that would otherwise kill you. Think about that. The margin between one branch of the human family surviving and going extinct may have come down, in part, to who figured out how to sew a sleeve. Now, here's the part of the story that goes beyond survival, because clothing did something else almost immediately, something that had nothing to do with staying warm. It became identity. Long before clothing was purely practical, humans were already decorating themselves. Shell beads found at sites like Blombos Cave in South Africa and Skull Cave in Israel date back over 100,000 years, deliberately pierced, strung, worn as ornamentation. Ochre pigment, used for body decoration, shows up in the archaeological record even earlier than that. This tells us something important. Clothing and adornment were never purely functional projects. From almost the very beginning, what you wore was also a signal. Status, group membership, identity, who you were, broadcast to everyone around you before you said a single word. So the honest answer to why humans wear clothes is actually two answers layered on top of each other. The first layer is a biological emergency. We evolved out of our fur for a hunting advantage and then had to reinvent insulation from raw materials when the climate stopped cooperating. The second layer, arriving almost immediately after the first, is social. The moment we had garments, we started using them to say something about ourselves. Clothing solved a problem our biology created, and then, almost instantly, it became something much bigger than survival. It became language. A language made of hide, thread, beads, and color, worn on the body, readable at a glance, understood without a single word spoken. By the way, here's where I want to leave you. Every single morning, you put on clothes without a second thought, and in doing so, you're unknowingly repeating an act that started as an emergency patch job on a design flaw a million years in the making. You are not just getting dressed. You are participating in one of the oldest continuous technologies our species has ever invented. Older than agriculture, older than writing, older than most things we consider foundational to civilization. Somewhere back there, in the cold, in the dark, a hairless, shivering human looked at an animal hide and had a thought that changed everything. Maybe I can wear this. That single idea, repeated and refined for 170,000 years, is the reason you're not standing in your kitchen right now, completely naked, wondering why you're so cold. It worked. It's still working. And you're wearing the proof of it right now, whether you noticed it before this video or not.